The shrill sound of the alarm clock cut through the silence at 5:30 a.m. Emily Johnson opened her eyes slowly, feeling the weight of another sleepless night. Beside her, Michael continued in deep sleep, oblivious to his wife's daily battle against fatigue. She got up carefully not to wake him, her bare feet touching the cold floor of the bedroom. In the dark hallway of the apartment in Brooklyn, New York, Emily paused for a moment in front of Sophia's bedroom door. Her hand touched the doorknob, but retreated. Arguments with her 16-year-old daughter were becoming more frequent, and the silence between them had become an insurmountable abyss. I'll talk to her later, she thought, as she did every day, knowing that later rarely came. In the kitchen, while preparing her strong coffee, Emily observed the city beginning to wake, up through the window. The first rays of sun painted the sky in orange hues, contrasting with the gray of the buildings. Nathan, her 12-year-old son, appeared sleepily, dragging his feet. "Good morning, Mom," he mumbled, hugging her waist. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well?" More or less. Sophia was talking on the phone late again. Emily sighed, pouring milk for her son. Another reason for an argument she preferred to avoid. Time was becoming increasingly scarce, words increasingly difficult to find. As an ICU nurse at New York Presbyterian Hospital, her energies were constantly drained by exhausting shifts, leaving little room to resolve family conflicts. "Mom," Nathan hesitated, stirring his cereal with the spoon. "Sophia said you don't care about us anymore." The words hit Emily like a punch in the stomach. Before she could respond, she heard Sophia's heavy footsteps in the hallway. The teenager entered the kitchen already in uniform for school, her headphones isolating her from the world, her phone an extension of her hand, not even a glance at her mother. "Good morning, honey," Emily tried, her voice almost begging for connection. Sophia removed one of her earphones without taking her eyes off her phone screen. "I need money for the geography project. Can we talk about this when I get back from my shift? I'd like to understand better." "Forget it," Sophia cut her off, replacing the earphone. "I'll ask Dad." Emily felt her heart tighten. In her 44 years of life, she never imagined her own daughter would become a stranger. Raised in a Christian family, Emily always believed in God, but her faith was more of a cultural inheritance than a deep conviction. In recent weeks, however, she had found herself praying more frequently, asking for guidance to reconnect with Sophia. The rest of the morning followed its usual routine. Michael woke up, had coffee in a hurry, and left for the law firm, where he worked. Emily organized the children's backpacks, checked schedules, distributed hasty goodbye kisses. Sophia dodged the hug, as always. In the elevator going down to the garage, Emily checked her messages. The hospital group was agitated. 2 nurses had called in sick, which meant more work for the present team. Her 12-hour shift promised to be even more intense than usual. Driving through the city that was beginning to congest, Emily allowed herself a moment of reflection. When did her life turn into this endless race? When did she lose the connection with her daughter? The questions echoed in her mind as she maneuvered her Honda Civic through the streets of New York. On the radio, an old song played softly, "Bridge Over Troubled Water" by Simon and Garfunkel. Emily smiled ironically as she heard the chorus that spoke about miracles. Miracles. How long had it been since she truly believed in them? The hospital was already buzzing when she arrived. During the shift change, she received information about the patients. 2 delicate post-operative cases, an elderly man with severe pneumonia, a young woman with cardiac complications. Dr. Thompson, the chief intensivist, gave the guidelines with his usual scientific objectivity. "We need to maintain strict protocol with Mr. Wilson in bed 4, he emphasized, adjusting his thin-framed glasses. "No talk about positive energy or prayers this time, Emily. We are a scientific institution." Emily nodded, swallowing hard. The previous week, she had been reprimanded for holding the hand of a terminal patient while she prayed. For Dr. Thompson, that was a waste of time and resources. For Emily, it was the minimum humanity she could offer. The hours dragged on between monitors, medications, and procedures. During her brief lunch break, Emily checked her phone. No messages from Sophia, only Michael, warning that he would be late because he had an important meeting. In the middle of the afternoon, while adjusting a patient's IV, Emily felt a sudden dizziness. She leaned against the wall, breathing deeply. The accumulated fatigue from several consecutive shifts was beginning to take its toll. Sarah, a young nursing technician, noticed her discomfort. "Emily, are you okay? You look so pale." "Just tired, Sarah, it'll pass." But something inside her said it wasn't just fatigue. It was as if her body was trying to alert her about something, an uneasiness she couldn't explain. She looked at the clock, still 4 hours until the end of the shift. At that moment, her phone vibrated. It was a message from Sophia. "Mom, I really need to talk to you when you get home. It's important." Emily's heart raced. After months of silence, those words seemed like a miracle. She immediately replied, "Of course, my love. I'll be home around 8 p.m. I love you." 3 dots appeared on the screen, indicating that Sophia was typing. Then they disappeared. No response came. The rest of the shift passed like a blur of tasks and responsibilities. Emily could hardly wait to get home and have that conversation with her daughter. Maybe finally they would be able to rebuild their relationship. At 7:45 p.m., exhausted but hopeful, Emily gathered her things in the locker room. The sky was already dark, and a light drizzle was falling over New York. Driving through the city streets, she mentally rehearsed what she would say to her daughter. It was then that everything changed. A sudden glare, the deafening sound of tires screeching on wet asphalt, an out-of-control car coming towards her. Emily tried to swerve, but it was too late. The impact was brutal. Twisted metal, shattered glass. Her body was thrown against the airbag with devastating force. The last thing Emily saw before everything went dark was an intense and welcoming light. And then, silence. Emily opened her eyes to a reality that defied all her understanding. She was no longer trapped in the wreckage of the car, nor did she feel any pain. On the contrary, she experienced an indescribable lightness, as if her being had been freed from all earthly weight. She floated a few meters above the accident site, observing the scene with surreal clarity. She saw her own inert body in the driver's seat, while firefighters worked frantically to remove her from the wreckage. Sirens cut through the night, their red and blue lights dancing on the wet asphalt. A small crowd was beginning to form. People, with their cell phones raised, recording that moment of tragedy turned into spectacle. "My God, my daughter is waiting for me," Emily thought. But strangely, there was no despair in this thought. A deep and inexplicable peace enveloped her, as if she knew that everything was exactly as it should be. It was then that the light began. It wasn't like anything Emily had ever seen before. It started as a golden point on the horizon, gradually expanding to form a tunnel of pure light. The luminosity didn't hurt her eyes. On the contrary, it was welcoming and inviting. Colors that didn't exist in the terrestrial spectrum danced at the edges of this tunnel, creating patterns that told stories without words. Emily felt herself being gently pulled towards the light. There was no fear, only a serene curiosity and a deep certainty that she was safe. As she advanced through the tunnel, she began to hear music, not with her physical ears, but with every particle of her being. It was a celestial harmony, a symphony that seemed to contain all the melodies of the universe. "Emily," a voice called, as soft as the brushing of butterfly wings, but at the same time powerful as the rumble of 1,000 thunders. At the end of the tunnel, a figure materialized. It was Jesus, but not as church images portrayed him. His presence was pure light, pure love, transcending any human description. His smile contained all the compassion of the universe. His eyes were wells of infinite wisdom. "My son," Emily whispered, the words spontaneously sprouting from her soul. "You have been walking with faith, even without realizing it," Jesus spoke, his voice reverberating through unknown dimensions. "Now it's time to discover the gifts that have always been within you." With a gesture, Jesus made 7 distinct lights appear, each pulsing with a unique energy. Emily instantly recognized them. They were the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit: wisdom, understanding, counsel, fortitude, knowledge, piety, and fear of the Lord. "Observe," Jesus said softly. Before Emily, scenes from her own life began to unfold, like a 360-degree film. She saw herself as a little girl, consoling a classmate, who had lost her mother. It was the gift of wisdom acting through her. She saw herself as a teenager, intuitively understanding her father's silent suffering, the gift of understanding. Each moment revealed how the divine gifts had operated in her life, even when she didn't believe. "But why me?" Emily asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "Why not you?" Jesus answered with a smile that contained the love of all the mothers in the world. Every human being is a vessel of divine gifts. Some discover this through joy, others through pain. You, Emily, are ready to awaken through love. Jesus approached, and Emily felt every cell of her being vibrate in resonance with the divine presence. He touched her heart, and at that moment Emily understood. All the questions of her life, all the doubts and fears, all the small and big decisions that brought her here, everything was part of a larger plan. Your gifts are not for you to keep, Jesus continued. They are to be shared, to illuminate the path of those who still walk in the darkness of doubt and fear. Images of her work at the hospital emerged, desperate patients, distressed families, exhausted colleagues. Emily saw how she could use each of the gifts to bring light to these situations. More than that, she saw how she could reconnect with Sophia, using understanding and wisdom to build bridges over the abyss that separated them. "But it will be difficult," Emily murmured, seeing the challenges that awaited her. "True love always is," Jesus replied, "but you will never be alone." At that moment, Emily felt a deep connection with all of creation. She saw how each person, each living being, each atom of the universe was interconnected in a sacred web of love and purpose. She understood that her mission was not just to survive the day-to-day, but to be a channel of divine light in the world. Jesus extended his hands, and the 7 lights of the gifts began to spin around Emily, faster and faster, until they merged with her being. She felt each gift integrating into her essence, not as external powers, but as natural aspects of who she truly was. "It's time," Jesus said with infinite tenderness. "Time for what?" Emily asked, although she already knew the answer in her heart. "To return, to live, to love like you've never loved before." The light began to diminish, but before Emily could feel fear, Jesus added, "Remember, faith is not based on what you see, but on what you choose to believe. And I will always be with you." The tunnel of light began to close. Emily felt herself being pulled back, but now she carried within her a luminous certainty. She was no longer the same person who had entered that tunnel. She was more, much more. Jesus' last words echoed in her soul like a celestial bell, as the earthly reality began to materialize around her again. The first sound Emily heard was the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. Her eyes opened slowly, adapting to the fluorescent light of the hospital room. The air had that characteristic antiseptic smell that she knew so well, but now it seemed different, as if each molecule carried a story to tell. "She's waking up," a familiar voice exclaimed. It was Michael, his face marked by deep worry lines. Dr. Thompson immediately appeared in her field of vision, his normally impassive expression betraying a mix of surprise and disbelief. "Emily, can you hear me? Do you know where you are?" "New?" "York Presbyterian Hospital," she answered, her voice hoarse but firm. "How long?" 4 minutes, Dr. Thompson replied, consulting the chart. "Your heart stopped for 4 minutes. Technically, you were dead," Emily completed softly. "I know, but I was more alive than ever." The doctor frowned, making quick notes. "Cerebral hypoxia can cause intense hallucinations. It's a well-documented phenomenon." Emily smiled, a serene smile that disconcerted everyone in the room. "Where is Sophia?" "Here, Mom." Her daughter's voice came from the corner of the room. Sophia was curled up in an armchair, her eyes red from crying, her cell phone forgotten in her lap. "Come here, my love," Emily called, extending her hand. Sophia hesitated for a moment, then ran to her mother, letting tears flow freely. I thought I had lost you before I could say, "I know, honey, I know." Emily hugged her daughter with all the strength she could muster, feeling the gift of understanding flow between them like an electric current of love. In the days that followed, Emily's physical recovery surprised the entire medical team. Her exams showed no sequelae from the accident, something Dr. Thompson classified as statistically improbable. But it was the changes in her behavior that drew the most attention. Emily began to speak to patients in a different way, as if she could see beyond their illnesses, touching their souls with words that seemed to come from a place deeper than medical knowledge. Her presence brought an inexplicable peace to the most agitated rooms in the ICU. One afternoon, while she was still hospitalized, a young nurse named Lisa entered her room, visibly disturbed. "Emily, I made a mistake with Mr. Johnson's medication," she confessed, trembling. "It wasn't anything serious. I managed to correct it in time, but I'm afraid of losing my job if I tell." Emily felt the gift of counsel awaken in her chest. "Sit here, Lisa," she asked, indicating the edge of the bed. With gentle but firm words, she guided the young nurse through her decision, showing how the truth, though sometimes painful, was always the safest path. However, not everyone welcomed her changes. During a meeting with the hospital administration, even before her discharge, Emily was formally warned. "Nurse Johnson," the administrative director began, his tone bureaucratic, "we've received reports that you've been discussing spiritual matters with patients. As a scientific institution—" "Doctor," Emily gently interrupted, "do you believe that science and spirituality are really opposites? Or are they just different languages to describe the same miracle that is life?" The director cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Regardless of your personal beliefs, we need to maintain a professional environment. This is your first formal warning." Emily nodded, feeling the weight of the challenge ahead. How to balance her new mission with the limitations of the material world. How to share the light without dazzling those who were not yet ready to see it. At home, the challenges were different, but equally intense. Michael tried to support her, but she noticed his fear when he caught her talking to herself during her morning prayers. Nathan was fascinated by the stories she told about her experience, but Sophia oscillated between moments of deep connection and sudden withdrawals. "Mom," Sophia asked one night, sitting on the edge of Emily's bed, "did you really see him?" "Yes, honey. And you know what else I saw? I saw how much love exists between us even when we can't express it." Sophia lowered her eyes, playing with the hem of her pajamas. "Sometimes I'm afraid you'll get so busy with this new mission that you'll forget about us again." Emily felt the gift of wisdom flow through her. "My love, what I learned is exactly the opposite. Everything I experienced showed me that love is the greatest mission of all, and you, Nathan, and your father are at the center of that love." That night, for the first time in months, Sophia slept in her parents' room. As she used to do when she was little, Emily stayed awake for hours, caressing her daughter's hair, feeling the divine presence in every breath, in every heartbeat. The real test, however, was yet to come. In a week, Emily would return to work. And there, between medical protocols and scientific skepticism, her gifts would truly be put to the test. The first day back at New York Presbyterian Hospital dawned with a typical New York drizzle. Emily took a deep breath before crossing the automatic doors of the main entrance, feeling the weight of curious glances from colleagues. Stories about her near-death experience had spread through the corridors like a virus, generating a mixture of fascination and distrust. Sarah, the young nursing technician, was the first to hug her. "It's so good to have you back, Emily. The ICU is not the same without you." Dr. Thompson was waiting for her in the doctor's lounge, his usually serious expression masking poorly disguised curiosity. "Welcome back, Emily. I hope you're, fully recovered." "I'm better than ever, doctor," she replied with a serene smile. "In fact, I've never felt so clear about my purpose here." The doctor adjusted his glasses, uncomfortable. "Just remember the administration's warning. Keep your personal experiences out of the professional environment." Emily nodded, but knew it would be impossible to separate who she had become from her work. The gifts she had received were not like a lab coat that could be removed at the end of the shift. They were an integral part of her being. Early in the shift, she was called to attend an emergency. Olivia, a 19-year-old patient with terminal leukemia, was having a severe crisis. Her parents, devastated, waited in the hallway while the team worked frantically to stabilize her. As she prepared the prescribed medication, Emily felt the gift of knowledge awaken. A deep understanding of Olivia's situation flowed through her. Not just her vital signs and symptoms, but the spiritual journey that young soul was traversing. "Emily, we need to start the intubation protocol," Dr. Thompson ordered. "Already. Preparing the equipment." "Wait," Emily gently asked. "She needs something first." Before anyone could stop her, Emily leaned over Olivia and whispered in her ear, "You're not alone. It's okay if you need to go. Your parents will understand." Dr. Thompson frowned, but something extraordinary happened. Olivia's vital signs began to stabilize gradually. Her expression of agony softened, and her breathing, though still weak, found a more natural rhythm. "This is interesting," the doctor murmured, studying the monitors. At the end of the shift, Emily was called to the nursing supervisor's office. Sandra, the supervisor, was known for her rigidity with protocols. "Emily, we need to discuss your behavior with the patient in 412, Sandra began, leafing through a folder of documents. "Some staff members reported that you were praying." "I wasn't praying, Sandra," Emily responded calmly. "I was establishing a human connection with someone who needed to feel understood in their most vulnerable moment." "But the words you used were the words she needed to hear. There's no protocol that prohibits compassion." Sandra sighed, closing the folder. "Emily, you've always been one of our best nurses, but since the accident, people are talking. They say you've changed." "And I have," Emily confirmed, "for the better. The question is that really a problem?" That night, returning home, Emily reflected on the challenges of her new reality. How to balance technique with spirituality, how to bring light without causing blindness. Her thoughts were interrupted by a message from Sophia. "Mum, can you come home early today? I really want to talk." Emily smiled, feeling her heart warm. It was in moments like this that she realized how the gifts manifested in unexpected ways. The gift of fortitude helped her face resistance at work, while the gift of understanding opened new paths with her daughter. At home, she found Sophia in the kitchen, preparing tea. The teenager seemed nervous, but determined. "You know, Mom," she began, unnecessarily stirring the tea, "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened, about your experience, about how you've changed. And what have you been thinking, honey? That maybe I need to change too. Not in the same way as you, but remember I had texted you that day before the accident?" Emily nodded, feeling the gift of wisdom flow between them. "I was going to tell you that I've been having anxiety attacks at school. That's why I was so distant. I was afraid of seeming weak." Emily wrapped her daughter in her arms, feeling how each gift received helped her be a better mother. "There's no weakness in asking for help, my love. In fact, it takes more courage than pretending everything is fine." As she comforted Sophia, Emily realized how each challenge in her life, at the hospital, at home, within herself, was an opportunity to manifest the divine gifts, not as supernatural powers, but as natural expressions of love in its multiple forms. The New York winter was particularly harsh that morning when Emily arrived for her shift. 3 months had passed since her return to work, and although tensions with the hospital administration remained, she had found a delicate balance between her spiritual gifts and her professional responsibilities. The ICU was busier than usual. An elderly gentleman had been transferred during the night, Robert Johnson, 78 years old, with a severe case of heart failure. His family anxiously awaited news in the waiting room. He worsened significantly overnight, Dr. Thompson explained, his usual skeptical posture slightly shaken. "We've tried all available protocols, but..." Emily observed the patient through the glass. Even without entering the room, she could sense something different emanating from him, a peace that contrasted with the gravity of his condition. The gift of knowledge whispered within her. He was ready to depart. "The family needs to be prepared," she said softly. Dr. Thompson looked at her with surprise. "The morning tests haven't arrived yet. How can you..." "Doctor," Emily gently interrupted, "some things don't need tests to be understood." Contrary to usual protocol, Emily asked permission for the family to enter the room, all 5 of Mr. Johnson's children. Dr. Thompson hesitated, but something in Emily's serene certainty made him agree. "You can talk to him." Emily guided the family. "Even if it seems he's not listening, believe me, he is." During the next hour, Emily watched as each child said goodbye to their father, sharing memories, forgiveness, and gratitude. The heart monitor kept its constant beep, but she knew the true miracle was happening at a level no machine could measure. When the last child finished their farewell, Mr. Johnson opened his eyes for the first time in days. A soft smile illuminated. His tired face and his lips moved in a silent prayer. Minutes later, his heart stopped. There was no panic, no desperate screams, only silent tears and the certainty that something sacred had happened in that room. "How did you know?" Dr. Thompson asked later, still impressed by the serenity of that departure. "I didn't know," Emily answered honestly. "I just trusted." But this experience, though powerful, was just the prelude to the true test of her faith. The following week, Emily was assigned to care for a special patient, Madison Taylor, a 23-year-old young woman with a rare neurological condition. Madison was different from other patients. From the first moment their eyes met, Emily felt a deep connection. The young woman had the same dreams as her daughter, Sophia. She wanted to be an artist, had a poetry blog, and her eyes sparkled when talking about the future. For 2 weeks, Emily cared for Madison with all her love and dedication. She used each of the gifts she had received to strengthen the young woman's spirit, to nourish her hope. Madison was responding well to treatment, and everyone in the hospital talked about the miracle that was happening, until, on a Sunday morning, everything changed. Madison had a severe seizure. The machines triggered their alarms. The medical team rushed to the room. Emily was there, her hands trembling as she assisted in the emergency procedures. For the first time since her near-death experience, she felt fear. "Please, Lord," she prayed silently, her hands working automatically. "Please, don't take her." But the monitors kept beeping. The numbers kept falling. Dr. Thompson began resuscitation maneuvers, his normally controlled voice now urgent and tense. 1 minute passed. 2. 3. Time of death, 9:47. Dr. Thompson's voice sounded distant, as if coming from another world. Emily was paralyzed. For the first time since receiving her gifts, she felt completely powerless. Jesus' words seemed distant. Faith is not based on what you see, but on what you choose to believe. But how to believe when death took someone so young, so full of life? How to maintain faith when miracles seem to have limits? That night, alone in her room, Emily cried like she hadn't since she was a child. Her tears were not just for Madison, but for all the times when medicine and faith seemed insufficient, for all the times when the mystery of life and death proved greater than our understanding. It was Sophia who found her like this, curled up in bed, trembling with contained emotion. "Mum," her daughter's voice was soft, concerned. "Can I come in?" Emily just nodded, unable to speak. Sophia lay down beside her, as she used to do when she was little and had nightmares. "You know, Mum," Sophia began, her voice carrying a wisdom beyond her years, "maybe miracles aren't always about saving lives. Sometimes maybe they're about how we live the moments we're given." Emily felt something awaken in her heart. It was the gift of understanding, whispering a profound truth through her daughter's words. It wasn't about having power over life and death. It was about bringing light to moments of darkness, whatever they might be. The days that followed Madison's death were the most challenging in Emily's spiritual journey. During her morning prayers, doubts whispered in her ears like an icy wind. What if it was all imagination? What if the gifts weren't real? On a particularly difficult morning, Emily decided to walk to the hospital chapel before her shift. The small sanctuary was empty, except for an elderly lady praying silently in the front pew. The light of the rising sun filtered through the stained glass windows, painting the floor with soft colors. "Lord," Emily whispered, kneeling, "I need to understand. Why did you show me so many miracles if I can't save everyone? Why did you give me these gifts if they have limits?" It was then that she felt a presence beside her. The lady who had been praying had silently approached. "Excuse me," said the woman, her kind eyes shining with wisdom, "but something tells me I need to share a story with you." Emily recognized the lady. It was Mrs. Connor, a volunteer at the hospital for over 30 years. Everyone knew her for her comforting presence in the most difficult moments. "When I was young," Mrs. Connor began, sitting next to Emily, "I also thought faith meant being able to perform grand miracles. Until my son fell ill. I prayed day and night for his cure, promised everything I could promise. But he passed away. Anyway," Emily felt her throat tighten, remembering Madison. "It was then that I understood," the lady continued, "that the true miracle wasn't in physical healing, but in the transformation that happened within me, in how I learned to love more deeply, to understand more completely, to accept more humbly." As she listened, Emily felt the gift of wisdom awaken in her heart, like a flower opening to the morning sun. It wasn't about having power over life and death. It was about how to use the gifts to bring light to each moment, whether of joy or pain. "Did you never think about giving up?" Emily asked softly. Mrs. Connor smiled. "Give up what, my dear? Love, compassion. These are the true gifts we receive, and they only grow when we share them." That afternoon, during her shift, Emily began to see her gifts with new eyes. As she talked with a young mother worried about her baby in the neonatal ICU, she realized that the gift of counsel wasn't about promising miraculous cures, but in offering presence and understanding. As she helped an elderly patient accept a new treatment, she saw that the gift of knowledge wasn't just manifested in predicting outcomes, but in understanding the deepest needs of each soul. At home, this new understanding also began to bloom. One night, while helping Peter with his homework, her son asked a question that caught her by surprise. "Mom, can you still see angels like you did that day?" Emily smiled, running her hand through her son's hair. "Not exactly, my love. But I've learned to see something equally special, the divine spark that exists in each person, even in Josh." "From my class who always annoys me?" Peter asked, skeptical. "Especially him," Emily replied, feeling the gift of understanding flow. "Sometimes, those who irritate us the most are the ones who need understanding the most." Sophia, who was passing through the hallway at that moment, stopped to listen. Emily noticed a different shine in her daughter's eyes, no longer the skepticism of the first days, but a genuine curiosity. "You know, Mum," Sophia said, leaning against the doorframe, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened to you, about how you changed, but you're still you, just more." "How so more?" Emily asked, interested in her daughter's perception. "It's like, before you were already a person who cared about others, but now you can really see people. For real, like no one else can." Emily felt soft tears spring to her eyes. It was exactly that. The gifts hadn't changed her essence, just amplified her capacity to love and understand. Jason, arriving home from work at that moment, found the three of them talking in Peter's room. He stood at the door, observing the scene with a smile. Emily realized that, even without fully understanding her transformation, her husband had learned to trust the new path she was treading. "Is dinner ready?" he asked, breaking the moment with his usual practical manner. Everyone laughed, and Emily felt a wave of gratitude course through her body. This was what her gifts truly meant, the ability to find the sacred in the simplest moments, to transform the everyday into a miracle. That night before going to sleep, Emily wrote in her diary, "Today I understood that the gifts I received are not for performing spectacular miracles, but for seeing the miracles that already exist in each moment. They're not for changing the whole world at once, but for bringing light to each small space of darkness I encounter. And perhaps this is the greatest miracle of all, learning to see God not just in the great moments of transformation, but in the small gestures of love in everyday life." It was a rainy Thursday when Emily received the news that would change everything again. Dr. Thompson called her to his office before the start of the shift, his face carrying an expression she had never seen before. "Emily, I need your help." "With a special patient," he began, nervously fumbling with his papers. "It's a delicate case." When he slid the medical chart across the table, Emily felt her heart stop for a moment. The name on the header was Charles Evans, the driver who had caused her accident. "He suffered a stroke yesterday," Dr. Thompson explained, studying her reaction. "He's in the ICU, critical condition, and you're our best nurse." Emily closed her eyes for an instant, feeling a storm of emotions. Memories of the accident came back like flashes. The impact, the fear, the tunnel of light. But now these memories came accompanied by a new perspective. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice firm. "Bed 7. But Emily, if you prefer, I can assign another nurse." "No," she gently interrupted. "It's exactly where I need to be." As she entered the room, Emily was greeted by a sight she would never forget. Charles Evans, the man who had almost taken her life, was connected to various machines, his face marked by illness and remorse. Beside him, a middle-aged woman held his hand, his wife, Emily presumed. "Good morning," Emily introduced herself, feeling the gift of fortitude flow through her. "I'm Nurse Emily Parker." Charles's wife, Mary, raised her tired eyes. You are—" "Yes," Emily gently confirmed. "I'm the nurse who was in the other car that day." Mary began to cry, her words coming out interspersed with sobs. "He never forgave himself. Since that day, he hasn't had a night of peace. When he found out you had survived, he wanted to go to the hospital to ask for forgiveness, but he didn't have the courage." Emily approached the bed, observing the unconscious man. Where before there might have been anger or resentment, now she found only compassion. The gift of understanding showed her not a villain, but a soul tormented by guilt. "Charles," she called softly, touching his arm, "I don't know if you can hear me, but I need you to know I forgive you." At that moment, something extraordinary happened. A tear rolled down the unconscious patient's face, and the monitors registered a small but significant improvement in his vital signs. In the days that followed, Emily dedicated herself to Charles's care with all her love and professionalism. Her presence in the room brought a peace that other professionals began to notice. Dr. Thompson, in particular, observed everything with a mixture of admiration and incredulity. "How do you do it?" he asked one day, after a clinical meeting. "After everything that happened?" "Doctor," Emily smiled, "remember when you said my near-death experience was just cerebral hypoxia? Maybe it's time to consider that there are things science still can't fully explain." The news that Emily was caring for the man who had caused her accident spread quickly through the hospital. Some called her a saint, others called her crazy, but it was her family's reaction that surprised her the most. "Mom," Sophia said one night while helping to prepare dinner, "I think I really understand now." "Understand what, honey?" "What? You always say about the gifts. They're not about doing extraordinary things, they're about loving in an extraordinary way." Jason, who was in the living room helping Peter with homework, approached the kitchen upon hearing the conversation. "You know, Emily, I confess I was afraid when you started talking about this experience of yours. I thought I had lost my wife to some kind of fanaticism. But now I see that I've only gained an even better version of you." Emily felt tears of gratitude roll down her face. It was as if each gift received in that tunnel of light was finally finding its true expression, not in great supernatural manifestations, but in the ability to transform everyday situations into moments of grace. A week after beginning to care for Charles Edwards, Emily began to notice subtle but significant changes in the entire hospital environment. The story of her forgiveness had spread like ripples on a calm lake, touching people in unexpected ways. Mary Claire, Charles's wife, had become a constant presence at the hospital. One afternoon, while Emily was checking Charles's vital signs, she shared something surprising. "You know, Emily," Mary Claire began, her eyes lighter than in the first, since you started taking care of Charles, I've been having different dreams. I dream of a very bright light, very similar to the one you described from your experience." Emily smiled, adjusting Charles's IV. "And what are these dreams like?" "It's as if I could see through his eyes on that night of the accident. I feel all the desperation, the regret. But then comes this light, and with it a peace I can't explain." The gift of understanding flowed through Emily, allowing her to comprehend something deeper. The healing wasn't happening just with Charles, but with everyone around him. Dr. Thompson, who was passing by the door at that moment, stopped to observe the scene. His usual skepticism had given way to genuine curiosity. After the shift, he asked to speak with Emily privately. "Emily," he began, removing his glasses and rubbing his tired eyes, "I need to tell you something. I've been studying near-death experience cases for years, always with a purely scientific view. But what I've seen happening in this hospital since your return defies all rational explanations." "How so, doctor?" "The patients you attend have significantly higher recovery rates. The anxiety level in the ICU has decreased considerably. Even the family satisfaction index has improved. And now this case with Mr. Edwards." Emily felt the gift of wisdom awaken. "Perhaps, doctor, science and faith aren't opposites. Perhaps they're just different ways of describing the same miracle." That night, upon arriving home, Emily found Olivia sitting on the apartment balcony, observing the illuminated city. Her daughter had a notebook on her lap, her poetry diary that had been abandoned for so long. "I wrote something today," Olivia said, her voice soft in the warm night. "Can I read it to you?" Emily sat next to her daughter, her heart overflowing with love. Olivia began to read. "There is light in the most unlikely places, in wounds that heal, in forgiveness that liberates, in hands that cure, and in love that transforms everything it touches. My mother is made of this light that doesn't blind, but illuminates, that doesn't judge, but understands, that doesn't impose, but invites to be better, to see better, to love better." Tears flowed freely down Emily's face as she hugged her daughter. The gift of piety manifested itself there, not as a distant devotion, but as a deep love that connected all things. The next day, something extraordinary happened. Charles Edwards opened his eyes for the first time since the stroke. His first word, whispered with difficulty, was forgiveness. Emily was by his side at that moment, changing his medication. Gently, she held his hand and said, "You're already forgiven, Charles. Now it's time to forgive yourself." The news of Charles's recovery spread quickly through the hospital. Dr. Thompson, reviewing his exams, couldn't explain the sudden improvement in his condition. But Emily knew. There was a type of healing that went beyond medications and procedures. One afternoon, while helping Charles with his physical therapy exercises, he managed to form a complete sentence. "Why did you forgive me?" Emily paused for a moment, feeling each of the received gifts vibrate in harmony in her heart. "Because I learned that forgiveness isn't something we give to others. It's a gift we give ourselves. It's a light that, when lit, illuminates everyone around." Mary Claire, who was watching the scene, began to cry silently. But they were different tears now, no longer of guilt or sadness, but of gratitude and hope. It was at this moment that Emily fully understood. The gifts she had received in the tunnel of light were not just for her. They were seeds that, planted in the fertile soil of love and forgiveness, germinated and multiplied, touching life after life in a chain reaction of transformation. Autumn had arrived in New York, painting the hospital trees with shades of gold and red. 6 months had passed since the day Emily began caring for Charles Edwards, and the changes at New York Presbyterian Hospital were visible to anyone who knew how to observe. The hospital administration, which previously viewed Emily's spiritual approach with suspicion, had now invited her to participate in a pilot project, the creation of an emotional and spiritual support program for terminal patients and their families. "We can no longer ignore the results," said the director during the project presentation meeting. "The numbers speak for themselves: shorter hospital stays, better response to treatments, higher patient and family satisfaction rates." Dr. Thompson, seated next to Emily during the meeting, couldn't hide his smile. He, who had been the biggest skeptic, was now one of the main advocates for the integration of medical and spiritual care. "You know, Emily," he confided during coffee, "I've started studying quantum physics recently. It's fascinating how the most advanced science begins to approach what spiritual traditions have always known. In the ICU corridor, where once only the cold sound of machines and monitors reigned, it was now possible to occasionally hear soft music. Sarah, the young nursing technician, had organized a small choir with the staff. They sang for the patients during their breaks. "It was you who inspired me," Sarah told Emily one afternoon. "I realized we don't need grand gestures to make a difference. Sometimes a simple song can bring more healing than a medication." Charles Edwards, already in the rehabilitation process, had become a sort of symbol of this transformation. His story of redemption and forgiveness circulated through the hospital corridors as a living testimony to the power of compassion. "Emily," he called during one of his physical therapy sessions, "I need to tell you something. Since the accident, I had been living in a personal hell, but when you forgave me, it was as if a door opened. Now, whenever I can help someone here in the hospital, even if it's just with a word of comfort, I feel like I'm paying a debt of gratitude." At home, the changes were equally profound. Olivia, inspired by her mother's transformation, had started a project at school, a support group for teenagers with anxiety and depression. "Mum," she said one night while organizing posters for the group's next meeting, "remember when I thought you had become fanatical? Now I understand that you had just found a deeper form of love." Jason, observing his wife and daughter working together, commented, "It's amazing how an experience that could have destroyed us as a family ended up uniting us more than ever." Peter, who was playing with his tablet on the couch, looked up. "Dad, that's called a miracle. The science teacher said miracles don't exist, but I know they do. It's just that they're not like in the movies. They're like when people change inside." Emily smiled, feeling each of the 7 gifts pulsing in her heart. The wisdom in her son's simple words, the understanding in Olivia's actions, the fortitude in Jason's transformation, the knowledge in Dr. Thompson's discoveries, the counsel that now flowed naturally to those who needed it, the piety that manifested in love for others, and the fear of God that revealed itself not as fear, but as a deep reverence for life in all its forms. One afternoon, while organizing the hospital's new integrative care wing, Emily met Mrs. Johnson, the lady from the chapel who had helped her so much in her moment of doubt. "See?" the lady smiled, her eyes shining with wisdom. "True miracles are like seeds. They need time to germinate, but when they bloom, they transform the entire garden." Emily nodded, deeply understanding the truth of those words. Each person touched by her story had become, in turn, an agent of transformation. It was a chain reaction of love that expanded in ever-widening circles. "You know what else I learned, Mrs. Johnson?" Emily responded, watching the sunset through the hospital window. "That sometimes we need to die a little to really start living, and that the greatest miracles happen not when we change the world, but when we allow love to change ourselves." On a spring morning, exactly 1 year after her near-death experience, Emily woke up before sunrise. She sat on her apartment balcony, as she did every morning now, for her moment of reflection and prayer. The sky was beginning to lighten over New York, and she could feel the city slowly awakening. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from Charles Edwards. "Good morning, Emily. Today is a special day, isn't it? I wanted you to know that I start today as a volunteer at the hospital. Physical therapy is almost complete, and I feel it's time to give back all the love I received." Emily smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude course through her body. It was amazing how life had its own circles of renewal and transformation. What had begun as a tragedy had transformed into a living testimony of the power of forgiveness. At the hospital, changes continued to bloom. The integrative care program had become a model for other institutions. Healthcare professionals from all over the country came to learn about New York Presbyterian Hospital's experience, to learn how to balance technical excellence with spiritual care. Dr. Thompson, in his office, was finalizing a scientific article on the measurable impacts of the integrative approach on patient recovery. When Emily came for her shift, he called her. "Look at this," he said, showing a graph on his computer. "The results are impressive. Significant reduction in hospital stay, less use of painkillers, improvement in quality of life indicators. And to think that a year ago you were warning me about talking about spirituality with patients," Emily joked. "A year ago I was a fool who thought he could put life in perfectly labeled boxes," he replied, laughing. "You taught me that the greatest science is the one that remains open to mystery." In the corridor, Emily found Sarah rehearsing with the choir. They now had a varied repertoire, including songs from different spiritual traditions. The soft sound of voices mixed with the noise of medical equipment, creating a unique harmony. "Emily," Sarah waved, "we prepared something special for today. After all, it's not every day we celebrate a year of miracle." "Every day is a day of miracle, Sarah," Emily replied, hugging the young woman. "We just need to have eyes to see." In her locker in the changing room, Emily found an envelope. Inside was a handmade card by Olivia. On the cover, a delicate drawing of a tunnel of light. Inside, words that made her heart overflow. "Mom, a year ago I thought I had lost you twice. First in the accident, then to a religiosity I didn't understand. Today I know that I actually got you back multiplied. You taught me that faith isn't about rules or rituals, but about how we choose to love. Love you infinitely, Olivia." Next to the card was a small diary. It was a gift from Jason, a place for Emily to record all the small and large manifestations of the gifts she received daily. On the first page he had written, "To the woman who taught me that the greatest miracles happen in everyday life, in the love we choose to give and receive. I love you today and always." During her shift, Emily was called to an emergency in the ICU. A young patient, victim of a serious accident, was in critical condition. As the team worked, she noticed something familiar in the frightened look of the boy's mother. "Ma'am," Emily called softly, "may I stay with you for a moment?" In the hours that followed, Emily shared her own story, not as a near-death story, but as a testimony of hope and renewal. She saw in that mother's eyes the same process of transformation that she herself had experienced, pain slowly being transmuted into the possibility of growth. At the end of her shift, Emily went up to the hospital chapel. Mrs. Johnson was there, as always, lighting candles and organizing prayer books. "Ah, dear," the lady smiled upon seeing her, "I was waiting for you. Look what arrived today." It was an official document from the hospital, the approval for the creation of a spiritual support center for patients' families. The project Emily had dreamed of was becoming reality. "You know what's most beautiful about all this, Mrs. Johnson?" asked, her eyes shining with wisdom. "Seeing how a single light can light so many others." Emily nodded, feeling each of the 7 gifts pulsing in perfect harmony in her being, the wisdom that now flowed naturally in her words and actions, the understanding that allowed her to see beyond appearances, the counsel that sprang from true love, the fortitude that revealed itself in gentleness, the knowledge that transcended intellect, the piety that manifested in service to others, and the fear of God that was, in fact, a deep reverence for life. At the end of that day, returning home, Emily stopped her car exactly at the spot where she had suffered the accident a year before. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky with the same colors she had seen in the tunnel of light. "Thank you," she whispered, knowing she was heard, not just for having survived, but for having really learned to live. Not just for having received the gifts, but for having understood that the greatest gift was the ability to love ever more deeply. At home, she found her family gathered for a small surprise celebration. Peter had made a poster with the words, "Happy Light Anniversary." Olivia had prepared a cake. Jason hugged her for a long time, without needing to say anything. Looking at that scene, Emily understood that her journey didn't have an end point. It was a continuous cycle of light generating more light, of love generating more love. Each day was a new opportunity to manifest the divine gifts in small things, to transform the ordinary into extraordinary through the power of love. And so, on an ordinary night that had become special, Emily celebrated not just her survival, but the true miracle she had discovered, that the divine light had never been distant. It was in every heart that opens to love, in every hand that extends to help, in every word that heals, in every gesture that forgives. The greatest gift, after all, was this, the ability to see in every moment of life the constant and loving presence of God.